Hello friends, welcome back to Learn English Master. Here we are going to discussing about Plato's observation of poetry or Plato's attacks on poetry. Plato attacks on poetry on four grounds. They are philosophical instability, poetic inspiration, emotional appeal, and non-moral character. The first one, philosophical instability. Poetry, according to Plato, is the imitation of nature. Explaining this famous definition of poetry, Plato stressed its philosophical inadequacies. The phenomenal nature, which is the object of poet's imitation, is but a shadow of true reality, which is the idea. As such, true reality is not the object of poetic imitation. The poet imitates a reality which is once removed from the genuine. Evidently, he imitates an already imitated form. The product of such mimetic process obviously is twice removed from the ideal reality. Hence, Plato reasoned that poetry is the imitation of imitation, the shadow of a shadow. Shadows may never be mistaken for reality. Poetry, therefore, is incapable of presenting truth. It is unreliable, being the product of falsehood. Poets are liars. Second division, poetic inspiration. The poet composes a poem out of inspiration. The muse suddenly fills him with inspiration and makes him sing. He never thinks no longer over what he has to say. Such a sudden outpouring of the soul can't be a reliable substitute for truth based on seasons. Plato admits that sometimes a poet's utterance will contain some profound truth, but truth comes out only when these are subjected to the test of reason. Philosophy, which is the result of careful and long deliberations, makes the individual a better citizen and the state of a better organization. So, in the ideal state as expressed in his Republic, there is no place for poets. Only those poets who composed hymns to the gods and panegyrics on the famous men could be approved of. Third reason for his attacks on poetry, emotional appeal of poetry. Being a product of inspiration rather than of reason, poetry appeals to the heart rather than the intellect. Poetry, being an art, is more concerned about the beauty of form. Emotions can never guide an individual in his search for truth. So Plato considered the tragic poetry of his age as having a baneful effect. He writes thus: "For if we let our own sense of pity grow strong by feeding upon the griefs of others, it is not easy to restrain it in the case of our own sufferings." So finally, poetry fed and watered the passions instead of drying them up and letting them rule, instead of ruling them as they ought to be ruled, with a view to the happiness and virtue of mankind. The final reason for his attacks on poetry, non-moral character. Plato attacks poetry for its lack of concern with morality. It pained Plato to see virtue often coming to grief in the literature of his time, the epic of Homer, the narrative verse of Hesiod, the ode of Pindar, and the tragedies of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Virtue and vice are treated alike. Sometimes virtue is triumphant, and other times vice has the upper hand. In classical Greek literature, the gods are portrayed in the most unfavorable light. They are presented as unjust or revengeful. Heroes are swayed by uncontrollable passions of all kinds: pride, anger, grief, lust, and so on. Such literature corrupts both the citizen and the state. Plato writes this. They gives us to understand that many evildoers are happy and many religious peoples are unhappy, and that wrongdoing, if it be undetected, is profitable, while honest dealing is beneficial to one's neighbor but damaging to oneself.